Hello and welcome back. Today for our second special podcast in collaboration with Birdlife to celebrate the International Day of Forests, I speak with Mike Seager, Forest Program Manager for the Americas. Mike details the incredibly diverse array of forest types across the continent from Canada to Argentina. We discuss the challenges of affecting change across such complex issues and locations, the importance of working with native communities, and much more. If you like this episode, like to follow more of Mike's work, please follow the links in the description. And if you would like to support us, you can make a donation at restoreourplanet.org or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Enjoy the conversation. Hello, and welcome back to Restore Our Planet podcast with me, your host, Jack Cole. Today I'm joined with Mike Seager, who's joining us from Birdlife Americas. So Mike, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I'm doing well today.
Good to hear. So tell us a little bit about your background and why your work is important and what brought you to doing your work today.
Yeah, great. So my background, I basically studied in my undergrad experience. I studied international relations and environmental policy at the international level, and from there, I sort of ended up shortly after graduating, spending a lot of time in South America. I moved quickly after graduating into a role with an environmental consulting firm, and I had a lot of exposure to working on environmental and social safeguards issues for international development projects in some of the most challenging environments and poverty-stricken environments in the world. I worked a lot in Haiti, the DRC, and I worked throughout other countries in Latin America. Always with an eye towards trying to improve the environmental outcomes of some of these international development projects. After that, I sort of transitioned more into the world of protected area management, natural resource management. I did a master's at James Cook University in Australia on natural resource management, and began looking more into forest ecology and carbon dynamics as part of my master's work there. After that chapter in my life, I came back to Ecuador, where I've been living now for about 10 years, with that break in Australia in between. And I've joined Birdlife right at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020. And have been supporting our network of partners across the Americas region on starting up, designing, implementing, and really delivering conservation outcomes for some of the most important forested landscapes across the Western Hemisphere. So I'm really happy to be in the position I am right now, very fortunate, and really exciting to be supporting our great partners with this on the ground conservation work.
Fantastic. No, I'm sure many of our listeners are very jealous of your travels and your adventures. So tell us a little bit about some of perhaps the more key areas in the Americas, or at least where you're involved, or what you find most interesting or most critical.
Yeah, so I'm right now at Birdlife. My position, you could say, is I'm managing the forest program for Birdlife International in the Americas region, and the Americas is really quite a spectacular and special place for forests, all the way from the boreal forests up in Canada down to the Amazon rainforest in South America, the Gran Chaco tropical dry forests of Bolivia, Paraguay, Argentina. We're talking about a region here in the Americas that has about 60% of the world's remaining primary forests, or forests that have not really experienced significant disturbance by humans. And so it's an exciting region to work in. Primary forests are particularly critical for regulation of our global climate. They have the highest density of carbon stored typically within primary forests, and they're also the areas that harbor the most biodiversity. And so, the Americas is quite rich in that sense for these last important strongholds of forests for our planet. Our Americas partners, from Birdlife International's perspective, the forests in the Americas are also critically important, not only for the carbon that they sequester, but also for the ecosystem services they provide to millions of people across the region. They provide food, they regulate water cycles, they provide timber, medicine. They are the basis of the cultural identity for tens of millions of indigenous and rural people in the Americas. So certainly, from the social, from the cultural perspective, these forests are critically important to the identity of people in the Americas. But from BirdLife's perspective, they're also the habitat for a range, hundreds of different globally threatened and range restricted birds. And they also provide really important wintering grounds and stopover for migratory species that every year traverse from North America to Central America, the Caribbean, and all the way down to South America and back. I mean, a really, really amazing journey that these little guys are making every year.
Absolutely. Okay, so bring that to more of a little local scale to you. Tell us a little bit about how things are in Ecuador and the sort of the conflict over land and territory and forestry and things of that nature.
Yeah, sure. Ecuador, we work in Ecuador and the wider kind of tropical Andes forested region with our partners. In particular in Ecuador, we work with our local partner, Aves y Conservación, and we are in the process of also bringing on a second partner in Ecuador. I think that speaks to the incredible importance of this country for biodiversity. And we're bringing on a second partner, which is kind of rare in BirdLife's context. Typically, we work with one partner in each country where we work, but here it's a little different. Ecuador has a really staggering diversity of forest types and forest ecosystems across the country, thanks in large part to the sort of elevational gradient, the Andes that run right down the heart of the country. And so along the eastern slopes, you have really great cloud forests that begin to transition into lowland rainforest and the sort of beginning of the Amazon basin. And on the western slopes, you have a whole range of different kinds of also cloud forests, high Andean, polylepis and really interesting, unique, endemic forest types, down into the tropical dry forests, which are also quite unique and harbor some really incredible biodiversity. And on those western slopes, you really find a lot of the most fragmented and threatened forest types, basically often threatened from agricultural expansion, cattle ranching, palm oil to a certain degree, and the expansion of that's kind of the main driver in Ecuador and much of South America is competing land use. Forests are increasingly converted to agricultural use, and that's driven by a range of factors. But in Ecuador, we are supporting a process currently right now with a range of different NGOs in the country that are working in northwestern Ecuador to develop a 10-year strategy for improving the conservation of critical habitat for birds within 4 provinces of northwestern Ecuador. And so the hope is that we're able to sort of build a sort of coordinated consensus-based effort for the conservation of northwestern Ecuador, and that we'll work together on this over the next 10 years.
Fantastic. And what kind of roles are should we say sort of indigenous local people? Well, obviously they could be 2 different things. What kind of role are, should we say, the more tribal indigenous people? For example, probably more in Ecuador, I imagine, towards the Amazonian part, which is obviously very similar in Peru. What's been their role in the sort of the conflict or the wider picture of conservation in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's at least in this world of conservation, it's quite well understood at this point that indigenous and rural forest peoples and First Nation peoples are often and have been the best stewards of our forested landscapes in the world, for millennia. These people have found ways to, basically best manage forests to promote their own livelihoods and their own lifestyle and their own needs. This is their grocery store, their pharmacy, and they're the best placed to manage and protect the biodiversity and the incredible diversity of plants and animals and biodiversity that you find in a lot of South American landscapes. And so there's an increasing recognition and need to get international finance and support for indigenous-led management of our forested landscapes in South America. And I think there have been some interesting commitments made at the recent International Climate Conference, and we're hoping to see that translated into real on-the-ground action and real on-the-ground transfer of resources to support this kind of work led by Indigenous people. So it's a critically important issue. I think that the more and more forests, reforestation, carbon finance, all these topics gain steam in international communities, and as we need to act quickly on these topics from a climate change perspective, it's going to be critically important that although there's pressure to act quickly, we really do make sure that these projects are designed in consultation, coordination, and with those local forest people who live and depend on the resources in these areas. And so it's kind of it's a challenge, it's a balance that we're going to have to figure out how to strike.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting what you said there about it. Like, it's their pharmacy, it's all these things. I remember I was with an indigenous lady in San Lucas, which is outside Loja. Those listening is in southern Andean part of Ecuador, and she was taking me through a garden, and she was literally pointing at things. She was like, "This is what we take when we have a headache. It has now been scientifically proven that this helps with headaches. Next plant. This is what we take when we've had some issues with digestion. And then it's now been scientifically proven that this helps with digestion." And basically, these people have been doing this forever, for way beyond any sort of Western influence or any kind of, quote unquote science that we've brought into these places. So I completely appreciate what you're saying about that kind of, it's that sense of finding that middle ground, and obviously consulting people who've been doing this, for millennia, as you say. Okay, so let's get a little bit into bird life. So tell us a little bit about some of the conservation projects that you've been working on and what's been going on, and perhaps a little bit of the history of how they came about and why they're so necessary in the current climate.
Sure. I can tell you about a couple different, larger scale and interesting initiatives that BirdLife and our network of partners are promoting in the Americas forested landscapes. One of the priority forested landscapes from BirdLife's perspective that we've been working in now for several years, and our partners have been working in for 15 to 20 years, is the Atlantic forest. Now, this is another kind of, this is a largely Brazilian forest biome that gets a lot less coverage, less attention than the Amazon. But really, from a biodiversity perspective, it's almost equally as rich as the Amazon. And really, from an endemism point of view, like how many, the concentration of endemic species is really staggering, and makes it one of the most important biodiversity hotspots in the world. I mean, the Atlantic forest, it used to stretch across the entire eastern seaboard of Brazil, basically on the Atlantic Ocean seaboard. And, this was an area that was around twice the size of Texas in area. So quite a large chunk of forest strip, along that whole seaboard. And it's been highly fragmented over the last few centuries since European colonization. 16% of the original extent of the Atlantic forest remains. And the southern part of the Atlantic forest extends into northern Argentina and sort of southeastern Paraguay. And we at BirdLife are working with our partners in those three countries to basically figure out ways to better protect the most important forest fragments that are remaining in the landscape, and build green corridors that connect these important protected areas and forest fragments with key biodiversity areas, KBAs, and that traversing, landscapes that are highly fragmented and, lots of private land use and farms across this whole landscape. And finding ways little by little with our partners to basically stitch back some sort of ecological connectivity in this patchwork of a Atlantic forest landscape. And so that work, is progressing quite well, and we're in the final year of sort of a 4-year initiative that we've begun working with those 3 partners, and we're hoping to renew the same initiative and build it up and actually scale up the restoration work and the protection work over the coming 5 years. So that's one super important piece of work that we're carrying out in the Americas and the Atlantic forest. And I'll just highlight one other that I began talking about before, which is sort of in the tropical Andes. We have a new initiative that's being called Conserva Aves, that is funded by the Bezos Earth Fund. And so we're quite excited about this new initiative that is aiming to basically place critically important habitat for birds that is currently unprotected or doesn't have any kind of protected area status. We're trying to identify the most important areas for a variety of bird species and place that under subnational protected area status. So as this is sort of a, it's proof that, oops, did we get disconnected?
No, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry, something happened.
Okay. Don't worry, we're half a world away, so these things all happen. Sorry to our listeners, but we are, it's okay. I can hear you nice and clearly.
Cool. No, I was just going to mention that Conserva Aves, it goes to show that basically the providing legal protection status to critical habitat is still like one of the most important tools in the conservationist toolkit, right? And, while creating national protected areas can present some range of challenges and kind of time delays, we're increasingly seeing in South America and other parts of the world as well that the creation of these municipal protected areas can be a quite effective instrument, as long as that assistance is coupled with the right kind of training for municipal staff and for local and regional government agencies. And so that's what this Conserva Aves initiative is trying to do. And we're hoping that over the next 4 to 5 years that we're able to place 450 to around 500,000 hectares of priority bird habitat under these subnational protected areas.
Oh, fantastic! Well, that's really good to hear. Oh, I didn't know about that. It's interesting. And of course, one of the real sort of challenges there is, of course, is having things, put under a certain status. But then obviously, law enforcement can be a real challenge to follow up on. So tell me a little bit about what are some of the perhaps more unexpected challenges that you found, or maybe cultural conflicts or things that were a little bit unexpected. And even though you're obviously quite widely traveled and you sort of expect the unexpected and things, what have been some of those more, especially somewhere, say in Latin America and in Ecuador, that you've really disappointed? You think, wow, this is a lot more challenging than I thought it would be.
Yeah. I suppose I could say that, like I said before, while there's sort of increasing attention and finance actually being put on the table to do reforestation and tree planting, and a lot of attention being placed on that as a strategy for climate mitigation and pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, it's a real challenge to find the places to do the reforestation in a way that's correct, the way that is beneficial for biodiversity and for local people. It's quite a challenge. It involves long processes often of community engagement, of talking with private landholders, of making sure that you have the right kind of supply chain set up to actually, and people trained on how to get seedlings established and harvest from the forest seeds to actually, get a nursery up and running and actually distribute the plants plant them in the ground at the right time of year, do the maintenance and the monitoring and the watering and the weeding. I mean, this is a significant activity that oftentimes doesn't translate to direct economic benefits for local people. Over time, it definitely accrues economic benefits for farming and for local processes, for local governments, and reduces costs of water treatment. There's a lot of benefits to doing reforestation, but it has been a challenge to often get groups of landowners and find the right places together to implement these reforestation projects.
All right. Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on from there, what would you like to see over the next sort of coming decades? Sorry, quite vague. Let's shorten that a little bit. 2025 or 2030 in your part of the world. What kind of things would you like to see based on trends that? Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, it broke up for a second there. Now I can hear you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, basically, I was sort of restructuring my question. So rather than sort of vague, what's going to happen this century? So in your part of the world, from what you can see through your work and through trends that you might see emerging, what would you expect to see over the next sort of 5 to 10 years?
Sure. Well, I think that something that promising that I see happening are a few different things. I'm seeing on a level here in South America, increasing interest from national and local governments in setting up their own policy frameworks to actually address the drivers of deforestation and to set up the right kind of instruments so that infrastructure projects or extractive industry projects will have to do a better job of both mitigating and offsetting the impacts that their industries are creating. And so I see genuine interest in a lot of governments in South America in meeting their climate commitments, in meeting deforestation commitments, and there's a lot of positive movement in that direction. Now, on the other side of things, in a lot of I guess you could say the consumer countries, the global north that actually, benefits from the raw materials that are produced in South America. I see similar movements towards this sort of common goal happening right now. Right now, the EU, the UK, and the US all have policies that they're sort of under development right now to try to weed out deforestation from commodities that are imported into their countries. They're looking to sort of regulate the process of make companies do supply chain risk analysis and mitigation and actually get them to prohibit the importation of commodities that are linked to deforestation. Now, these are all regulations that are still in the draft stage, but they've been tabled officially in the EU Parliament, and the US also had some senators put forward similar legislation to the EU bill. And so, there's from the consumer side, the global north side, there's also this recognition that, our commodity supply chains, our beef, our soy, our palm oil that we're importing into our countries for our products are directly linked and driving this deforestation that is really affecting the global community. So, that's quite promising, and seeing that both producing countries and consuming countries are sort of moving in the right direction on these topics is quite promising. So I'd hope over the next 5 years to 5 to 10 years, see the right kinds of policies set up and to see those actually begin to translate into on the ground action and transparency in some of these supply chains.
Fantastic. Okay. And Mike, so what should we be talking about but aren't, would you say, in this sort of not just conservation, but perhaps more in your part of the world, what you've seen, what sort of frustrates you when you see things being sort of overlooked or not spoken about?
I think I'd say that, the first thing that comes to mind that's actually also recently changing quite a bit is the incorporation of the importance of biodiversity in our climate change mitigation planning and solutions. It's beginning to become a little bit more mainstream, particularly in the previous global meeting, Copenhagen. About trying to find nature-based solutions is sort of this hot topic word in this climate regime right now, in global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, finding ways to kind of team up climate mitigation, reducing emissions, and pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, with also providing benefits for biodiversity and for the ecosystem services that people depend upon. I would say 5-10 years ago, those were siloed approaches. And I think more and more now people are seeing biodiversity is also a factor that is inextricably linked to climate change and to these issues. And if we, I think that for many years biodiversity wasn't really significantly or sufficiently considered. And there's been some great research done, talking about now we're officially in the era of the Anthropocene, and that we're actually making causing another mass extinction. And so I think the global awareness about biodiversity and the sort of crisis that we're facing right now with the loss of biodiversity is growing. So that's promising. I guess that doesn't quite answer your question. I think
that's fantastic.
It's on the uptick, and I said that it was sort of a topic that was frustrating for a lot of people working in biodiversity and environmental work for many years. But I'm glad to see that these things are starting to come together.
No, that's good. No, that's a nice place to end, really. So Mike, where can people find you and follow your work if they want to see a little bit more of what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. So BirdLife International has, of course, their social media channels. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter. But BirdLife Americas, our office specific to the Americas region, also has our own social media channels. And so you can find us there. We periodically host webinars and presentations of some of the work we're doing across the region. And it's a great way to engage and learn about what's going on throughout South America, Central America, around some of these topics I've talked about today.
Perfect. Mike, thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, Jack.